Oh my gosh, am I tired? And I'm gonna let you see it. I stayed up until 4:30 in the morning last night watering my yard. Yeah, windstorm. I know. Believe it or not, I walked around, crouched down with one of those big waving sprinklers, upside down, about 6 inches off the ground. Because I said on a previous post, we're gonna watch my yard throughout the year, in a different category that I'd aerated the whole thing, and I waited for rain. I waited for rain forever, and I knew my plants were expecting it because there's a couple drops and it smelled the electricity, but it was just a dust storm where we live. It was super dry, and I used that fan of water and those 40, 50 km/h winds to just spray my trees. So I feel good about it. And if that sounds weird to you, what I was doing at 4:30 in the morning 20 years ago was nowhere near as productive as what I did last night. Talking about coming from old world, they work around the clock. They have shifts, right, on those farms. So there's guys that are running machines all through the night because stuff's got to get done. And right now it's super important because everything is waking up. So if it dries up, it won't, none of those seeds are going to crack. So I'm staying on top of it, and yeah, today it's wet. That glass is empty. So doing some homework, and I just wanted to share what today's topic was. I think it's really interesting that the thing I've been on about just for my own personal journey, it's like the next chapter in the book. It's so fun how the universe connects you to what you're interested in, because it's like my schoolwork is almost like metaphysically engaged in what I'm doing, because I'm thinking about these things before I'm exposed to them, and then it's like the book is confirming, which is pretty cool. So they're talking about Freud here, and it was about personality, structuring the personality. So this is part of your behavior, right? You have three parts, they said, and you had an ID, which was like who you were at the bottom of the iceberg, and then the ego is like your executive, that's who kind of is up in front, and then there was a super ego. And he talked about us in comparison to a child with candy. So any of you that are parents or anybody young, like you know that impulse of a child when they want it, right? They must have it. So I'm just going to take about 2-3 minutes here and talk about the unconscious mind, and how that plays a role in how our personalities are created. And a lot of it is that his theory was that it was learned behavior. So it was called psychodynamics, just to get into the history of it. Psychodynamic approach to personality. So it said here that a number of Freud's followers, including Carl Jung, Karen Horney, and Alfred Adler, refined Freud's theories. So it does branch out a lot into the mapping of our society, for sure. So he proposed that psychological difficulties could be treated through psychological intervention. So, according to Freud's theory, conscious experience is a small part of our psychological makeup and experience. He argued that much of our behavior is motivated by the unconscious, a part of the personality that contains the memories, knowledge, beliefs, feelings, urges, drives, and instincts of which the individual is not aware. In particular, Freud held that our unconscious contained the life and death instinct, respectively, our intimate instincts and drives, known as libido, and our aggressive instincts, known as destruction. The three separate parts of the interacting components of a person's personality was the ID, the ego, and the superego. He suggested that the three structures can be diagrammed to show how they relate to the conscious and unconscious by an iceberg. The ID is at the bottom. What if you were facing the iceberg, you would see the ego, and the superego is behind it yet still. So you're above water is your conscious, and below water is your subconscious in that imagery. So general model of personality that describes the interaction of forces that motivate behavior. The ID is the raw, unorganized, inborn part of the personality. From the time of birth, the ID consists of primitive drives related to hunger, sex, aggression, and irrational impulses. Those drives are fueled by psychic energy, which can be thought of as a limitless energy source, constantly putting pressure on the various parts of the personality. The ID is never satisfied, always demanding, because its energy source has no limit. And there's always something that would give it more pleasure in any given moment. The ID operates according to the pleasure principle, in which the goal is the immediate reduction of the tension or maximization of satisfaction. Let's use an analogy, it says here. Imagine the ID as the child who wants instant gratification. For instance, if it sees candy, it must have the candy. It must have it now. However, reality prevents the fulfillment of the demands of the pleasure principle in most cases. We cannot always eat when we are hungry. We can discharge our own libido drives only when the time and place are appropriate. Now, this was Freud's theory. To account for this fact of life, Freud suggested a second component of the personality, which he called the ego. The ego, which begins to develop soon after birth, strives to balance the desire of the ID and the realities of the objective outside world. In contrast to pleasure-seeking ID, the ego operates according to the reality principle, in which it considers the constraints of the real world by factoring in what is socially acceptable through social norms. In a sense, then, the ego is the executive of the personality. It makes decisions, controls actions, and allows thinking and problem solving of a higher order than the ID's capabilities permit. Remember, endless energy doesn't mean that it has direction. It needs to be harnessed. Back to the analogy, if the ID is a demanding child, then the ego is like the parent trying to decide and weigh if it can give into the ID's demands by factoring in if it's acceptable to do so. So your ego should have morals, a moral compass of some sort, morality. Part of your birth, where you start striving for balance against urges, part of your human design. Your parents and your environment play a role in your behaviors and your personality because somebody wants an outcome for society. The superego, the final personality structure to develop in childhood, represents the moral part of our personality. The superego includes the conscious, which prevents us from behaving in a morally improper way by making us feel guilty for doing wrong. Similarly, it reminds us of the times when we have been praised or encouraged for things that we have done right. The superego helps us control impulses coming from the ID, making our behavior less selfish and more virtuous. However, the superego is harsh and critical. Like the ID, it's never fully satisfied either, as the superego always believes we could have done better and been more virtuous. To complete the analogy, the superego is like the moral and righteous sibling of the demanding ID. These are 3 parts. And so you kind of maybe look at Western society and see how much development of the ego or the superego has really been honed or used, or if maybe in some form our society, the limits of it have kept us in a form of infancy in our way of thinking, keeping us in the ID, right? Like that. Instantly satisfied, get me out of trouble, get me out of feeling yucky, give me something that feels good. And that's not reality to constantly fill that impulse. I mean, naturally, if we didn't live in this construct of like everything at your fingertips, you probably wouldn't even behave that way, because you would have been raised in a structure where things weren't instantly gratified. So this is why it's important when you hear these words in psychology to think about like it not being personal to you, that you're consciously deciding to, I don't even know what to call it. There's so many parts of it. For me, it's learning that we've been modeled, we've been tricked into certain personalities, and that, abstract thinking, abstract personalities really stand out. And we've been, kind of conformed into a way that if it doesn't look like everything else, then it's something to be afraid of. It's something to be uncomfortable with. But it would seem that had we developed these things early on in childhood, we wouldn't be uncomfortable with these things as adults. They just would have been part of our developed personalities, right? Like our virtue and our morality and our wanting to act in a way where people praise us rather than judge us. I think maybe that's why the world feels like it's so judgmental. It's because there's a lack of judgment on our own parts. So then it's like looking for the root of it without realizing that your question and your problem started on the inside. So there's a dissidence in your belief and your identity with the idea that's been made, to work with the ego that's in the reality principle. So, like, reality is individual. The psychology has said this forever. So, whatever mainstream is saying about new things, keep in mind the DSM-5 is updated every year, just about. Like, that thing started out this big when I was a kid. It is like huge. So, just because you start labeling things doesn't make them what they are. And we have to remember how competitive we are in a race. Like, everybody just wants to change the verbiage, say the same thing, but say it's something else, and then give us something to debate about. That's wasting too much time. If more people were focused on the task at hand than the task that they were McDonaldized to do, standardized to do, would we have more cohesion? I'm just asking. I mean, in the sense of like, if we had less bickering, would we have more cohesion? Right? If we were less looking at the outside and saying, well, that sector gets more money, this gets better, whatever, they get better, blah, blah, blah. Where it's like, okay, but that's all out of your hands. What's in your hands? Like, have we done that? Have we like, you're looking at it like the problem is massive, right? But you're so disengaged with something so big. So it's like, what can you handle? What's right in front of your eyes? Like, I love you guys, but I can't see you. You live so far away that it doesn't affect my universe in any way until your orbit enters mine. Right? And that's the stuff I like to celebrate. That's the fun stuff. But I mean, otherwise, I can be worried about what everyone else is doing, and then if my actions are going to be approved by other egos and personalities. That's not an internal quest. that's existence, yeah, you're here to exist. And there's nothing wrong with that because we're natural. We're going to do that. We're just going to survive. But I do want to, ask people how much they rely on their own instincts versus how much they rely on our convenience. And if maybe we don't know stuff because of convenience, like I really think that that's the thing. Some of the stuff that I didn't know is because machines do it now, or because it's not made that way anymore. So I didn't even know it was that easy. That I didn't, lots of stuff, lots of stuff. It's been a big discovery process. And, I just want to bring you to this place of like, there was always a construct around our world. It's been here since before our grandparents were born. And to really realize that convenience gave us the idea that, oh, it never happened here. And you gotta remember, like, I'm the fourth generation born here. Okay, so at some time, my family comes here because you can't stay where they are. And they build relationships with the people that are here. They agree to respect what goes on around here, but they stay in their traditions and in their beliefs and their morals. So you can see where my inner conflict is, right? I've been exposed to both sides. And like, I do think that there's a way that us 80s kids were born in the fast lane. With some old world parents, like we're really not that far out from grandma's homemade stuff, right? And if we lose that, then we're starting from scratch and we're really going to be reliant on machines, right? So I don't know. I've seen a lot of dystopian movies before I quit watching TV. You know what I'm talking about. People just dazed and confused, bored, sedating themselves, satiating themselves, because like you can't fill the hole if you're not out there doing something. And doing something isn't like, well, what is everybody doing? It's like, man, what do I want to do? What do I want to do? Because right now at this age, I'm like, I got 40 years to do what I want to do. So like, if I look back and I think, holy cow, I already had 40, and like, there's so much stuff I did in there, and looking for the skills and the tools I have back there, being grateful for all of it. That's what's gonna grow me up over the next 40 years. That's what's got me like, well, I can't change anything today. I might not even be able to change anything this year. But if I keep going the way I'm going, it's all going to change. It's all going to change. And like, sounds so cliche, but they always say that these little tiny humans, us, they're always like, but I'm just one. What can I do? Well, I don't know. What if everybody said what the homesteaders were saying? What if you guys all started repeating something weirder than the weird stuff we've been taught to repeat? Like jingles. Man, have you ever forgotten a 7-Eleven jingle? That's insane. You know that the only way we're going to get anywhere is if we start repeating the same behavior. It's going to come down to a retrain. But you're the boss, you're the teacher, you're the preacher, you're your own nurturer now. And it's lifetime. Don't make your expectations too big. Like when you were a kid and they handed you a skipping rope for the first time, and you're like, what? And then you think about it, and like for the girls, man, for my age and my era, we picked that thing up fast, and then we were doing it on our free time. And then we were trying to learn things like double dutch for fun, for our own self-worth, for our own, like, can I do it? Like, it's virtue. What's virtuous? I want to know that I can, push myself to some extremes, conquer some stuff, And it took practice. Everything took practice. So It doesn't take any practice to keep up with the mainstream news. It doesn't take any practice to just listen to the radio every morning. It takes some practice to start putting audio books on. What are you interested in? You know, do you want to hear about ancient aliens? Download some books. Do you want somebody to read you a story while you're driving about like haunted Canada or what? Guys, again, the Jetsons. We live in a place where you can have your truck read to you. Like, man, I live in an hour outside of any place of convenience. And I'm in rural Manitoba. So my drives are long, and I've definitely come to training myself in a way of survival where, you know, I only travel into the big cities to stock up. And then I don't do a lot of driving around. And my gosh, if I drove around today on today's prices, the way I drove around when I could fill my tank for like, or I could go that hour for $5, holy cow. I wouldn't afford a house. I can't drive around like I wanted to. I can't just jump into my car. Well, I can, but it burns so much of my money. Then I'm like, you know, so to me, it's definitely come down to like, what do I really need? Like, what if it was it just like go do, without thinking effortlessly? And I want you guys to know, you know, what I've learned about how we develop. A lot of us know because siblings, because kids, because grandbabies. You know, there's a lot of experience we've had that our society says, don't worry about that, honey. Let's do this. I was never good at that. I have a divergent brain, a neurodivergent brain. So I see things done and then I like deconstruct. So there's a little bit of an explanation to why things come out the way they come out. But it's, I have a belief that, you know, I can do it. So this has always bothered me that I feel like I'm not in power of that. I'm not in control of that. That wasn't my choice. And that's not my ID. That's my ego trying to find my balance. Right? That's my super ego. That's my inner subconscious. That's my psychic energy. You know, that's the stuff you're made of. That's just your natural composition because we're all designed with a moral compass of some sort. That's what makes us the apex predator. That's what makes us the beings with all that like speech and building and math and smarts and knowing. Don't let anybody tell you what you know. If you don't know, go figure it out for you. Come check out the rest of my YouTube channel, guys. Thanks so much.